This is Synchronicity.
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 Welcome to episode 12 of Synchronicity. This is... No. I gotta start that over. Welcome to episode 12 of Synchronicity. I can't do this right today. All right, take 3. If I nail this, I'm gonna play the other 2. Welcome to Synchronicity, episode 12. My guest today is Eric Zimmer, and from the One You Feed podcast. All right, that was not a great intro, but I'm going to lead that one because, how many times you can do this. Mercury is in retrograde, by the way. That was pointed out to me by one of my favorite people, Maureen, who is part of Love Serve Remember Foundation. Maureen is the greatest person. If you don't know Maureen, your life is somehow incomplete and you don't know it. But she pointed out that Mercury was in retrograde as we were dealing with the work situation, and it makes total sense. Like, part of me, I believe in astrology. I don't go and necessarily get my horoscope, but I believe in it. And but part of me doesn't want to believe in it. Like, okay, well, no, this can be explained rationally in some very simple way. But honestly, it's felt since Mercury has been in retrograde, and I don't know exactly when it started, but at least for me, a couple weeks now. Oh man, things have just been going haywire. I mean, technologically, relationship, personally, all of these things. It's just crazy. Not horrible, but just like things are going haywire. So Mercury's in retrograde. I think it ends January 25th. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't expect everything to get suddenly great then, but if maybe just like 1 or 2 things could go a little less haywire, that would be nice. Including things that have gone haywire. One of my favorite people on the planet, musicians, just people, David Bowie, passed away earlier this week, and that sucks. He was super awesome. He also just released a new album, Black Star, which is it's good. Good album. Not my favorite David Bowie album, but I don't think it has to be my favorite. But it's a good album. It's really cool, and I only listened to it a couple times, but I know there's some stuff on there that's totally worth revisiting. But anyway, more to the point, he's got some of my favorite albums, period. Just so many good albums. My favorite David Bowie albums. Here we go. Unfortunately, I do fall into the trap that Ziggy Stardust is my favorite David Bowie album. I had it on vinyl. I think my parents did, and I loved it. So that is my favorite. Maybe it's a little obvious, but it's so good. So good. And when you're a kid, it's got nostalgia in it. Just a great album. I love Hunky Dory. I really love Hunky Dory. There's some amazing songs on there. And then I think probably my third favorite is Aladdin Sane, which I actually really didn't like the first few times I heard it, but that's a great album. Anyway, I'm not going on a whole David Bowie kick, just in terms of music. I think he was just a really, really awesome person. And personally, on social media, I've noticed just such an outpouring of admiration and respect and love, and it's pretty awesome. The only other time I can remember, because I was talking about this with a friend, what other time was there something like this where everyone was just like universally like, oh my God, totally crazy? And Michael Jackson had it, and I love Michael Jackson, and I definitely was devastated when he was younger too. But, there was a little twist there because he has the allegations against him, sexual misconduct, whether you believe that or not. There's some bit of darkness. David Bowie, for the most part, everyone just kind of seems to really just respect and admire. And it's just really a nice thing to see because he was beyond a musician for a lot of people. He was progressive in sexuality, in just kind of pushing the boundaries of what an entertainer was. And then just like, in the past few days, I've seen so many videos and little clips where he was just like, he was challenging the head of MTV in an interview about why there was no black people on MTV. They were making amazing music and videos, and why weren't they doing just like, at a time where it didn't behoove him to do that, except he's David fucking Bowie and he wanted to do that. He's performed with everyone. I mean, he, shit, The Labyrinth. I mean, anyway, David Bowie's the fucking man. So, whatever you want to do to celebrate him. And if you haven't really listened to David Bowie, you don't have to love David Bowie. But I bet there's at least a song or two that you really, really like. So I recommend checking out David Bowie. Okay, David Bowie rant over. Eric Zimmer. This is now, today, you got a real treat in a guest, because Eric Zimmer runs a podcast called The One You Feed, and he's got his buddy Chris. He helps audio engineer that and does some intro stuff. He's cool too. But Eric is the main interviewer on that podcast, and what The One You Feed is, it's based off a parable, and you'll hear in the episode what the parable is, but it essentially is a conversation about what kind of life do you want to be living. So I like those types of those topical shows based on that specific topic. That being said, I've also found a lot of shows that kind of purport to be about, leading a better life aren't my cup of tea. They're maybe a little heavy-handed, or they're not really, I don't know. I just don't vibe with them. This one, however, I will say, just having listened to it, one of the podcasts I listen to on a regular basis, it's great. Eric has a great way of evoking really excellent, responses organically from his guests. One of my favorite episodes, if you want one to start out checking out, is with Sharon Salzberg. She's incredible, obviously, and she has a great reaction to the parable, which we discuss in this episode. I discuss it with Eric. Outside of running the podcast, man, Eric is just a cool dude. He really has, he's had not a painless life. I don't know anyone who has, and I found out very early in this podcast, I didn't know this, he has dealt with addiction issues relating to heroin. He's recovered twice, but to me, one of a grounded dude. He's also very open and transparent about his issues he's had, and I always respect someone who has the confidence to do that and seems to do that in an authentic way. That means a lot to me. But we talk about the reason this episode is so good, and I said you're in for a treat, is we talk about practical tips, and that is, I'm really into that. I can get really off into space about, there's this mystical technique, and there's this, and we'll take this substance and transcend the elements of the universe and get some new perspective. And I believe that. Don't get me wrong. Not at all admonishing that, but it can then get lost in translation. It's kind of like the Ram Dass thing, right? He kept getting high. He kept saying getting really higher and higher, but then he always had to come down. So I think that's just the law of the universe from what I can observe. So what goes up must come down. So when you're down, or when you're not as up, let's say, what are some practical tips you can use to better your life and your relationships, and just, make your life a little easier? I don't know exactly what we're going for. Shit's going to happen, right? Heavy shit's going to happen no matter what. But maybe being able to look at it where it doesn't affect you to make decisions that are harmful. I don't know. That's a good place to start. But to alleviate suffering, right? Let's start there. Anyway, here's some practical tips just that I pulled out from a re-listen to this thing. He talks about the importance of starting small. He talks about accountability in a practice, which I can tell you this. Speaking of accountability, coincidentally, a nice little synchronicity here, name of the show. My mom started this thing at the beginning of the year where we're going to do this meditation thing where one of us texts each other either left or right. And left means you meditated today, and right means you didn't. And I can tell you this, I really don't meditate that much, but when your mom is texting you left, I've actually meditated first thing in the morning when I wake up, but it really has been one of the things that keeps me doing it. Eric speaks about it in the context of spiritual practices, but also just like physical things, trying to get in better shape or be healthier, accountability aspect. And I think we got into that, how that ties into community. And then we also got into awareness and kind of mindfulness. I know it's a dirty word now because it's kind of just been overused, but really how an awareness practice can give you a little bit of space, this concept of space. Sharon Salzberg talks about that a lot. I'm seeing Sharon tomorrow. Tara Brock has a regular class at this Unitarian church in where I live in Bethesda, and Tara's at the Refuge. She's gone there, and Sharon's coming in tomorrow, so I'm excited to see her tomorrow. So yeah, but this podcast is just great. It's really great. This is something that I would listen to if it wasn't. You don't always want to listen to my same voice, but if it wasn't me, it's something I would listen to, and that to me is the mark of a good show. So I hope you guys feel the same way. A reminder: rate and review this podcast on iTunes and other places. The reviews have been coming in, and I really, really appreciate it. I really do. So thank you for that. And yeah, without further ado, here is Eric Zimmer from The One You Feed.
Stone love, she kneels before the grave, a brave son who gave his life to save a slogan that hovers between the headstone and her eyes, for they penetrate her grieving.
Seriously, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Yeah.
I've listened to a couple of your episodes. I'm interested where you're going to go with this, just because you've had such a wide variety.
Yeah, so. They're eclectic. I just wanted to, like I said, I didn't want to make it one particular thing. Like that's kind of like what I like what you're doing with the parable, because you allow people to kind of take it and do what they want with it, because it's not a loaded question, but it promotes a response, right? It provokes a response. Right. So I'm kind of doing the same thing with mine, but I'm also just like identifying people who I think are cool, right? Like that's what it is. That's the only common thread between the guests at this point. They're pretty all over the map. Okay, so I'd love if you could, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to find out more about you. I'd love if you could provide like a brief biography of what prompted your interest in philosophical and kind of quote unquote spiritual concepts, because I know that's weaved into the show. And then also leading further that question, what led then to you starting the podcast?
Yep. I think, my original interest in philosophical or spiritual things, I think it's probably always been there to some degree. In high school, I had a high school teacher who introduced me to some of the Zen Buddhism concepts, like, D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts and some of that stuff. And I remember reading it and getting interested in it, but I don't remember, I'm not sure I really got it at all at that age, but I was intrigued by it. It set the stage. I took a transcendental meditation course when I was 18.
Cool.
So I was pulled towards that stuff. I spent the next, from about 18 to 24 though, in increasingly bad spiraling drug addiction. And so I sobered up from a heroin addiction at age 25.
Oh, wow.
And I think that I was forced to get into philosophical and spiritual concepts in order to stay alive. Like, I got into a 12-step program, which is very much, they're very much sort of, the heart of it is a God-related or a higher power thing.
Yes.
And so I started to adopt that simply as a strategy to stay alive.
Yeah.
But then I found that it interested me, and I wasn't content with the sort of normal idea of like, well, God as maybe was presented to me in most, in a Christian culture. So I then went back to a lot of the things that had sort of interested me in high school and started to really explore primarily Buddhist concepts a lot. But I just was interested in spirituality. So I think it was a combination of sort of a natural inclination, maybe being exposed to certain things at the right time, and then just I think it's part of what keeps me alive as an addict, right? I mean, I think that's, we could talk about what spiritual is, but I think some sort of spiritual connection is what allows me to stay sober.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good reason to do it. I'd like to actually delve into that a little bit.
Sure.
So what has helped you tangibly and practically in terms of staying sober? Is it a perspective shift? Is it a tools or something you got out of it? Like, I'd like you to speak about this, because one of, I've spoken about mental health a little bit on this podcast, and I've had personal issues with mental health, and I put addiction into the same category. Is that it's a very real gripping one that is more tangible in some ways, but yeah, how has that helped you, like, specifically?
Well, I mean, I think, I got I got sober twice. Once when I was 25, and then I had about 8 years of sobriety, and then I went back out and drank again for a few years, and have been back for coming up on 9 years.
Oh,
So,
congratulations. Cool.
it's 12-step programs are what have gotten me sober. And the first time around, treatment centers and 12-step programs.
Sure.
So that was sort of the means. What I think is interesting is what underlies that, what
Right.
allowed that to work in my case. And I don't go to a ton of 12-step meetings anymore. I still go, but I don't go a lot. So what is it? What is it within that? And I think that 12-step program traditionally would say you got sober because God came and made you sober. That's not something I really believe. Right. I think ultimately it was the idea of, people would say there, but by the grace of God go I, right? When they
Right.
look at somebody who is drinking again. And I just was like, well, why would I be being given that gift and these people next to me not be given that gift? It wasn't an answer that I
Satisfied.
could
Yeah.
live with.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is a lot more confusing, and I don't think anybody really knows the answer. Like,
Yeah.
why do some of us get sober and why do some of us don't? But I think there are some real common things that people who get sober do. I think one is 12-step programs give you a community to be in.
Yes.
They give you a group of people in which to help you, support you in getting sober. They give you something else to do. They give you a social framework. And I think that's why people talk about cigarette addiction being so hard. And I think it is. And I'm not sure it has as much to do with nicotine as it has to do with the fact that we almost all do it on our own by ourselves.
And that's a really good point.
I think that, so for me, the higher power that we talk about in 12-step meetings is really the group. It's the people. It's the recognition that I'm not going to do this by myself. I think the second part of 12-step programs that were really important was, this emphasis on a spiritual connection. And so we can interpret that lots of different ways. And thank God the original founders of AA found it to put in the words "God as we understand Him" to allow that thing to kind of open.
Yeah, so it's not as rigid and doctrinized.
It's still very. We say the Lord's Prayer at most meetings. It still has too much of a Christian feel for me. I think in today's world, we should do less of that and be more open and inclusive because it's an easy way for addicts to go, well, I'm not into that God thing anymore.
Yeah, and which I think is probably something people might be believing at that point, being an addict. So
it's hard to know. Is that their denial because they don't want to, or a legitimate concern?
Right.
I prefer not to see it there.
Sure.
But I think that what AA is pointing at, that again in a different way, is a spiritual connection. And I think, spirituality. I ask people on the show all the time, like, what does spirituality mean to you? It's such a namby-pamby word.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
It can mean a lot or nothing.
That's why I say quote unquote. It's yeah.
But, for me, spirituality is really about going inside and finding something to connect to that matters. And so that's what I think that finding something to connect to that matters is a big part of recovery. Finding something besides ourselves to obsess about. Because I think if you want to draw a common line between mental health and addiction, one of them is there is a pervasive thread of constant self-consciousness, self-awareness, self-preoccupation, self-obsession, not in the healthy reflective sense,
Right.
but in the all I can think about is me.
Like a
How
trap.
I feel, what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my body, what do people think of me, what does the world think of me? It's all me. And so AA, in the book somewhere it says, selfishness, self-centeredness was the root of our problem. And there's a little bit of a judgment in that, which I think can turn people off a little bit. But I think at the heart of it, it's pointing to a very big truth, which is if all I think about is myself, I get sick. That's me personally. I will get sicker and sicker if all I think about is me.
I can completely relate to that, and I think it's just one of those things that an antidote to that is when you're not just thinking about yourself or your limited self perspective. Excuse me. You create space and
right.
space allows you to actually function and breathe metaphorically and actually to figure out what's going on, take a step back, get some. My big thing, one of the themes that has emerged on this show is perspective. I think the more perspectives people can cultivate about any one seemingly maybe one way situation, the better off you're going to be in terms of making a decision, a wise decision.
I agree 100%. I think perspective is so big.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's lots of different ways to play with perspective. You
Yes.
can play with perspective like I'm one part of a million people. That's a perspective.
Yeah.
We can play with perspective in time. You know, this is 1 minute versus 1 hour versus, you know, and that's, you know, that's the game addicts play is, you know, a part of recovery 1 day at a time, right? 1 minute at a time is to recognize, like, you know, is to change the perspective on what we're looking at. But I couldn't agree with you more that it's that myopic, you know, when I just look at something so myopically, I get sick. And in AA, we talk a lot about, you know, let go and let God. And I struggled with that for a while because I don't believe in an interventionist being out there that is going to come in and clean up things, right? Like, is going to make sure that I get the job I want or I get the parking.
That's
right?
not my conception either. Yeah.
So in that case, if you're saying let go and let God, what are you letting go of? And what I realized at a certain point was it didn't matter. Just the letting go.
That's right.
Was what was important. I mean, I could, you know, I got the tighter I cling to myself, my ideas about what I want, what I need, how I feel, I just get sicker.
Yeah. And I mean, when you say sicker, I interpret it as not only as psychologically and spiritually getting sicker, but I've noticed if I get really caught up in me situations, things that are going on, I physically get sick. Like my immune system starts to go down and I get sick and I'm like, why am I getting so sick? And I get angry about being sick. And it's like, I know the self-perpetuating kind of like cycle that can get this.
Yep.
I luckily and fortunately in my life, I've only battled depression at one point in my life, and it was after I was diagnosed as bipolar. I had a 3-4 months of very intense manic phase where I don't know, it's what clinically we would call manic, but spiritually I think what happened is I popped open some type of chakra somewhere. I legitimately believe this, and I was just plugged into a different form of consciousness. All I could go around and talk about to people with no regard for their interpretation of what I was saying was unconditional love. Oh, it's all unconditional love. It's all the source of love. And quite frankly, while I believe what I was saying is true, to this day, my approach was turning so many people off. And it was just like what you see now kind of on the web and these self-help and spiritual things like, oh, you got to love. And yes, that's a component of it. That's the hard aspect of it. But there also needs to be this wisdom component to it. So I just remember going back to the depression thing. I will never forget what that feeling was like. And it was only for 2-3 months, but it was truthfully one of the most difficult places to be in. It just felt like the world was so bleak and dark. And what actually was happening is exactly what you're describing. All I could think about was myself. It's all I could think of, how bad it was for me, how bad the world was, how nothing was working out for me. And it luckily, again, it was so different from the way I normally perceive the world that I was able to be like, okay, well, this is something fucked up. And then it goes into what you're saying too, the concept of community or sangha in Buddhism or satsang. That's ultimately what got me out of that situation. I am not considered classically bipolar anymore. I don't take meds anymore. I pulled myself out of the situation. But I couldn't have done it alone. Like I know that for a fact, without my family, without my friends, without, you know, people helping me, truthfully, like that would have been almost insurmountable odds. So I think touching on that concept, I mean, I think that's something that's emerged for me over the past few years is some type of community is just such an important tool for helping in your life. Because otherwise you don't have that reflection back at you. Is this helping? Is it not? It's just you can fall into the trap of making spiritual concepts about you, right? Chogyam Trungpa's thing, spiritual materialism. So I love that you keyed in on that. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your podcast, which I love. Really, really great. It's called The One You Feed, and it's about a parable. I'd like you to say the parable and then talk about the genesis of the podcast. How did it come about?
Sure. So the parable I don't know if it has a strict name. I call it the parable of the two wolves.
Sure.
I've heard it told as dogs. It can be, whatever. It's often attributed to the Cherokee Indians, which I don't think is true. I don't think anybody really knows where it comes from.
Sure.
Somebody attributed it to Billy Graham, so who knows? But there just doesn't appear to be a good. So I've left off attribution entirely.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it any less profound though. So in the parable, there's a grandfather who's talking with his grandson. He says, "In life, there are two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One is a good wolf, which represents things like kindness and bravery and love, and the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear." And the grandson stops and he thinks about it for a second, and he looks up at his grandfather and he says, "Well, grandfather, which one wins?" And the grandfather says, "The one you feed." So that's the parable. That parable I first learned early in recovery for me the first time. And I think as a recovering addict, that parable was incredibly profound, because that's the whole game in particularly in early recovery, is where do you, which of those two wolves are you going to feed?
Yeah.
Are you going to put time, energy, and effort into your recovery, or are you going to put time, energy, and effort into pretty much anything besides your recovery is kind of feeding the bad wolf at that point. So I heard the phrase a long time ago. I mean, I probably first heard the phrase when I was 26 years old, and I'm far older than that now. So, it'd been around a long time. The podcast came about in sort of a strange way. I had formed a solar energy company, and after about 4.5 years of it, the solar energy world in Ohio was changing dramatically. A lot of the legislation that was in place that made me think that starting a solar energy company was a good idea was getting rolled back. Ohio was becoming legislatively increasingly more conservative, and public policy has a lot to do with whether solar energy works or doesn't work.
Just a little, yeah.
So I started thinking, well, maybe I'll transition and I'll build an online course about how to develop solar projects. And so that got me interested in online marketing, a little bit. And so I started thinking like, well, okay, you build a course, how do people find it? So I started just sort of learning that, and that led me to podcasts, and I started listening to podcasts just because I was like, oh, this is fun and interesting. And I eventually decided I didn't want to do the solar energy course. I just had kind of that solar energy in me had run its course at that point. And one day I got the idea to do an interview podcast where I asked people about that parable.
Yeah.
And I talked to my best friend Chris, who does our audio engineering.
Yeah.
And the next day, and he said he wanted to do it, and we just kind of started from there. So that's kind of how it happened. I don't really know where the idea came from. I can't remember, was I like trying to think up a podcast idea? I don't really know.
Yeah.
I remember going, oh, I want to do that.
Like all great ideas, sometimes they can get a little bit murky in how they really came about. But I mean, it sounds like cross-pollination, right? You were thinking that you wanted to do a podcast. You were also listening to other people doing them. You knew that parable. You knew how transformative it was in some way for you and your process. I mean, it's I really find it to be one of the best premises for a podcast. I bring it up specifically. There's one. So you asked this question, right? Which wolf do you want to feed? And I think it was with Sharon Salzberg. And she goes, I look at the question in a weird way, which is I want to be compassionate to the bad wolf and, nurture those, not nurture the qualities to have them, proliferate, but to just be a little tender with them instead of averse them. And I was like, wow, she's obviously brilliant. But I just love, so my next question is, how do you go about, and I did listen to for people who haven't heard the podcast, the 100th episode, I believe, is an interview with you and Chris, right? It's, yeah, and it's great. And that's how I got a lot of information on you. But how do you go about like figuring out, because I know it's very important to you and you do research, and when you're interviewing people, you take some time to devote, which I love. Like to me, that's why I do this podcast too. I'm interested. I find someone cool. I want to learn more about them and have a platform. So what typically is the process for piquing your interest in bringing someone on the show?
I luckily am just one of those people that is always looking around.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm just like, if I see your room right now and you've got those bookshelves over your shoulder, if I walked into your room right now, I would be finding a way to get over there to see what books are on that shelf. Right? That's just the way I am.
Sure.
I started a solar energy company because I was browsing around the library like I always do and saw a book on clean energy and thought, oh, that looks interesting, and read that book. So that's kind of the way my brain works. So it's a perfectly, thinking of what guests I want to have on the show is a lot of the fun. I just come across them.
Yeah.
the internet is a great place. It's got, a hyperlink to this and a retweet to that. And,
Yeah.
and I just follow it and go, oh, that's interesting. Or I walk into a bookstore and I see books on the shelf and I write down the person's name.
Right.
Some I knew, right. I mean, there are people right away when I started, like, I was like, I want to have X, Y, and Z and X, Y. I'm like,
Sure.
A lot of people I knew I wanted to have on early in the game. Sharon Salzberg, for example, like, she was, she would have made the early list.
Right.
Right. People who were known teachers. But like you, I like the parable because it gives me a chance to go after really all different kinds of people, but then bring the conversation into at least, it gives me a very loose framework so that the show's not a random whatever happens. There's a little bit of a theme to it,
Right.
but it gives me a lot of latitude, so I can go after spiritual teachers, I go after musicians, I go after authors, I go after psychologists, I go after athletes. It just it gives me a pretty wide frame. So my list of people to have on the show is always, there's always 50 or 60 people, like I'm
Of course, yeah,
it's not, that is not the hard part.
Oh,
People, and these days we've gotten. I mean, we're not like a huge podcast, but we're we've got some.
No,
degree
you
of
have
visibility.
you're popular. I mean, it's not a mystery why. It's
Yeah.
like it's good. It's a really good podcast, and I love what you're saying about the latitude because I've this is going to be the 11th or 12th episode. I've also tried to weigh against how to frame a podcast because I like the chat format, I like the interview format, but I also like some semblance of structure, but also the freedom to kind of explore things as they come up.
Yep.
And yeah, I love the approach. It really is. It's really working.
Yeah, and I mean, our subtitle is Conversations About Creating a Life Worth Living.
Yes.
So I almost frame when I'm looking at a guest, I almost frame it more through that lens than the parable lens. Because the parable I can ask. I'm like,
Right.
do I think this person has something, do I think they have something to contribute that I could learn about or the listeners could learn about living, a life worth living, whatever that means to you. Do I think they have something to contribute to a conversation about living a better life? And so that gives me lots of room to roam, but also keeps me within,
Yeah. Well, and
within realm.
I like the service aspect of that too, because that's one of my main reasons for doing this too, is I like to connect people with things that I think can help. I know you can't help everyone, but at least you can make information available or at least normalize it or at least provide a spectrum of things that people could potentially be interested in. And listen, there's a lot of podcasts out there that purport to be self-help, for this, for that, the other thing. But I think people's intentions behind those are different at various times. Some people may be doing it for a marketing thing or for something else. But one thing I've noticed with your podcast, Chris too, it's that there's the spirit of helping and really trying to get that out. And you evoke it in your guests too, which is another kind of really special thing that I think you've gotten increasingly good at as time has gone on too. It's impressive. So I'm not just going to build up your ego here though. So can you talk about, what are the difficulties or challenges you've come up against or noticed with running a podcast? And they don't have to be major, they don't have to be big things, but little things here and there. I'm sure there must be some.
Yeah, I mean, one, it's sort of trifling, but like you and I are talking right now and we both have a microphone. And it sounds great, right?
Oh, okay. I know where you're going. Yeah.
We try so hard. I mean, I brought Chris on specifically. He's an audio engineer. We've tried for what would be, broadcast quality sound from the minute we went live. It's been a big focus of ours. And so we do everything we can on our end, but every once in a while we get a guest. We had Don Miguel Ruiz on, I don't know, a couple months ago.
Yeah.
You'd think after being, selling whatever 10 million copies of a book, we wouldn't be talking on some like 1943 cell phone. It's just he was almost unintelligible.
No,
and that's frustrating to me as a podcast host hoping to deliver something to people that is great, is that I only have so much control.
Yeah.
And for better or worse, like I think there's a lot of podcasts today where it's internet entrepreneurs or mediapreneurs or whatever you want to call them interviewing each other. Great. it's easy to get good sound. I tend to be going after people that just don't spend, I like a lot of older, wiser people who
Right.
are not on Skype. They don't have a microphone. And so that's one of those things that if I could just, snap my fingers and make go away, I would love everyone to sound good.
Yeah.
Just because it's easier as a listener, right? As a listener, if I'm listening to a show and if the sound is so bad that it's distracting, I'll usually turn it off.
I know. See, you notice what I notice, which is if I am not going to listen to it or it's affecting my experience with it, I automatically, this isn't always true. This reminds me, there's something I learned very early on. I grew up playing saxophone, and we would have, I was in jazz band, and we would be playing on the stage, for a concert or something. And, I'd be worrying about messing up in my solo or something. I didn't want to hit the wrong note or something. And then I remember getting up there once, and it was okay, but I definitely messed up a few times, and I realized 99% of people didn't actually know that there was a problem. But I am still just like you. I don't care about that. I want the 1% who do notice to actually have a pleasant experience, because it's how I approach it. So I totally get that.
I've learned to let go of it to a certain degree.
Yeah, you have
to. Chris is pretty good at EQing it and doing what he can to make it sound the best. I let go of it. And I think for the most part, if it's not great, but it's okay, in a minute or two, you forget about it.
Right.
It fades into the background. But there are some times, so that would be the one. I think the second thing about a podcast, you mentioned, I prepare for my guests a lot, is I do. So my life is a never-ending cycle of books to be read, things to be done, which all in all is what I think I love to do.
Right.
So I love doing it. It's just that sometimes it becomes overwhelming. I have a tendency to do these things where I will book a ton of interviews in a short period of time. I don't know why.
What's a ton? Because I think I'm falling into this trap.
I sometimes I've had 4 a week before.
Yeah, which
is just brutal. Because like I said, if I'm going to have somebody on the show and they've got a book, I want to have read the book. As best I can.
Absolutely.
Now, some people you're not, Sharon Salzberg's got 15 books. I'm not going to read them all.
Right.
And I've gotten better at that. We had Andrew Solomon on very early. He wrote The Noonday Demon and Atlas of Depression. He wrote another book called Far from the Tree about children who have conditions different than their parents, deaf children, autistic parents, how identity is formed in those. And the guy, each of those books is 600 pages. And I was like, I'm going to read them. And I read all of them, which was preposterous.
Yeah,
so I can't keep that up. But, I tend to be like, all right, that one's done. And then I immediately turn and go, okay, what is it now?
Yeah.
So I don't do as much pleasure reading as I used to.
Yes.
But it's all, that was part of the design of the show. I was like, if I do this show, I'm going to have to keep these topics front of mind because I'm going to be reading about them. And that will, part of my motivation was to keep my head in a good place.
I get
and
that.
It does that. So, but that's the other one probably is just the sheer volume. And I wrestle with that sometimes because I think that this, a spiritual path or a self-improvement path or whatever you want to call it is knowledge is certainly part of it. But action is a bigger part of it. And so what does it mean when I just keep throwing a different person at listeners every week? So I really work to try and in the interviews and what I'm doing is to think about concepts that recur and to try and tie those together. I say it on the show all the time. We talk on the show a lot about X because I'm trying to tie what we're hearing this week with what we've talked about 5, 10, 15 times so that these truths or these ideas sort of keep coming back to people and maybe you can hear them differently through a different analogy, a different voice. But I just don't want it to be constant, I want to frame up the key themes that matter.
Well,
and so that's something I sort of wrestle with a little bit, and I'm trying to figure out how to do better.
Well, I think, truthfully, from my perspective, you're doing a pretty good job of it. It's not something that's also easily done to create a framework or kind of cohesion for these types of interviews. Because, again, there are many different perspectives, some similar themes, some somewhat different. But I think you're doing a pretty good job of that. So my next question for you is this. You have a day job, I assume. What is your day job, and how do you manage kind of doing what you, because I truthfully, I say this, I wouldn't ask this to everyone who does a podcast. Some people do a podcast, takes them an hour a week, no big deal.
Yep.
But I can actually see and hear now that you really put time and effort into this, and it is a job. I mean, I know that.
It
So
definitely is. So
Yeah.
I have a day job. I do I do e-commerce consulting for different large Fortune 500 clients. I have one client right now. It's a retail client. The job is, the good news is that I like the work. It's challenging. My brain has to be very active. The people are great, and I have a good deal of flexibility in it. So those are all positive things. So if I had my way, I would be doing the podcast and the related coaching and all that stuff full time. But that's
Sure.
not where I'm at. I'm heading that direction.
yes.
So right now it's just a lot of work. It's
Yeah.
just like, the people are like, well, how do you do it all? And I'm like, well, I just don't do a lot else.
Yeah,
Honestly,
I'm
like,
aware of this.
I'm a musician, and one of the things I love about the show is that Chris and I write. There's 2 music breaks in every show.
Yeah.
We write the music breaks for every show, so I love that. But I would love to be playing in a band.
I know.
But that's not going to happen right now with the time constraints I have. Like, that's something I have to say I'm not going to do. I would love to watch more, quality TV. Right? Like,
Yeah.
there's lots of great series. There's lots of great movies. There's
Yeah.
lots of great documentaries. I don't do much of that. Like,
Yeah.
occasionally I do, but by and large, like, I don't watch TV. That's a decision. I think
Of course.
I
You
think
have
that
to,
we
yeah.
all, I think that's one of the myths of modern culture that I think we all struggle with, is the idea that we can do everything.
Yeah, no.
I just don't think we can. And so I think being conscious of the decisions about what's important to me, what do I want to spend my time on, is one that I think I've gotten pretty good at. I built the solar company while I was doing another job. So I
Right.
kind of have this I think one thing I've learned to do is use time very well, very efficiently. I try not to spend a lot of time monkeying around. Everybody does,
Of
right?
course.
Facebook or Twitter can be a drain, but I'm pretty good. I'm pretty disciplined about how I spend my time, which is the only way I could do it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if I spend 40 hours a week on the podcast, but I spend a lot.
Oh,
I
get it, man. It's funny.
It's booking guests, it's preparing, it's marketing, it's releasing the show, it's editing. It's a lot of time.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's funny. I'm noticing a lot of parallels in how we've chosen to structure our respective lives. So I went to a music college, Berklee College of Music. I graduated. I make music in my spare time. I actually put in the bumpers in my podcast are things that I've made in the past.
Nice.
So I get that exactly what you guys get, the creative outlet,
Yep.
a little more than just speaking. You get to actually put the music
Right.
out there to play.
Right.
It's amazing. I also am a consultant. I work with primarily spiritual and, those types of clients in that sector. But it's the same type of thing where I have the latitude and kind of flexibility to work the way I want to and structure it. And I've noticed the exact same things as you have. I am always asking myself the question of striking the proper balance between what I'm promoting, what I'm doing with the podcast, what I'm doing work-wise, and then trying to manage my life, right? Like the other things that are going on.
Yep.
My wife, I got a kid on the way, all these other things. And it seems to me where we are at this time and place, we have so much more opportunity and flexibility to kind of craft these lifestyles based on whatever the skill set we develop. And I long ago realized that I think the most successful people now and in the coming years are going to be this brand of kind of creative professionals, for lack of a better word.
Yep.
People who can function in the digital world, but also can translate those skills into real life and for other businesses and organizations and for themselves. Because I can tell you this, if there's one thing I learned about the digital world and just kind of the entertainment world from being in music school is there is not a lot of guarantees in that space. I saw so many talented people
so many talented people who didn't either have the luck or the drive or the right connections, who just did not make it. So it requires kind of this constant effort. So it relates to what you're saying, because you've set up these kind of machines or systems in your life that feed your good wolf, right? That's what they do. And it's brilliant, because you've created these things. I've done a lot of the same things, but then I always look at the systems and I'm like, is this the right system? Should it be tweaked here and there? Should I find more space to do this? So yeah, I relate to a lot of what you're saying, and kind of your experiences in more ways than one. And I find it,
Yeah. I think that's that idea of doing something means you can't do something else. Choosing this means I can't choose all these other things. Still, I don't love it, right? It's one of those like, but I think as I've gotten older, I've accepted it better. I think what I've learned to do is I really know it's true. And so if I was trying to do a podcast and be in a band and work on my novel, and I wouldn't get any of those things done, well at all. And so I've learned a little bit, because I think I used to do that. I used to try and do 15 things, and now, and most people I know would say you do too much, but I'm relatively focused, like the show, and I think if you, like you said, I think if we think about it a little bit and we choose well, we can get a lot of what we need out. Like, I found a way to indulge my curiosity, my desire to talk to people, my desire to make music. I mean, I've managed to find a way to shoehorn it all.
Totally.
The show. And so I it feels to me like I kill a lot of birds with one stone, so to speak, by doing that. But those can be challenging things to do.
You touched on something that...
Hey, can you hang on one second?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you getting up, I noticed something I have to bring up. You're in Ohio, right?
I am.
You're a Steelers fan? Because your seat has a Steelers thing. Yeah, is that...
It does. If someone in the family is from Pittsburgh.
So they make you sit on the Steelers fan thing.
Actually, I don't pay much attention, paying attention to sports.
That's not a thing you can't,
by the wayside. But I do, if I was going to root for an NFL team, I'd probably root for the Steelers.
Smart.
Although the Browns, I suppose you could root for just out of pity.
Oh, yes.
But growing up as a kid, I liked the Steelers. So like I said, I got back into sports for a few years when my son was younger, and he was really into them. It was something we did together, but as he's grown a little bit older, he doesn't much care. So
I unfortunately have been a lifelong Dolphins fan, and sports is what I consider one of my fundamental spiritual practices, because I have slowly, very slowly over the years gotten less reactive to the Dolphins being a terrible football team, but not really that much. So it's it actually moves into what I wanted to bring up when you were talking about setting up these systems. You started with, basically the concept of awareness. You have to have some level of awareness of what you would like to do and how to do it as the starting point, which kind of feeds into, I've noticed one of the themes of the one you feed is awareness. And it's this kind of the Buddhist concept of wisdom. Could you talk a little bit about awareness and how you kind of work that in, or how that comes out? And then follow up to that is any other emergent themes you've noticed come out of the one you feed?
Yeah. I mean, I think awareness for me is such a big one, because it's really hard to do anything else without it. It's really hard to, it's hard to make changes in your life if you're not aware of what you're doing. And I think that is probably I don't even know if I would call it a modern thing. I don't really know. I just know that my default is to go on autopilot, right? Is that there are enough things in life to drag me along minute by minute, day by day by day, to keep me completely busy all the time, and not even think about any of it really, except in vague passing moments. So awareness for me is to try and shift out of that autopilot and be more conscious about what am I, how am I spending my time? What am I doing with my time? How am I acting towards the people around me? How am I, how do I, what do I spend money on? What do I eat? All those things take awareness to change. And so, I think awareness is such a huge piece of being able to live a good life or to feed your good wolf, because it seems like it's the easiest thing in the world to not be aware. At least it is for me. It's very easy to not be aware. And I think that then leads into the idea that a lot of times, not making a choice is making a choice.
Yeah.
And, so that's why awareness for me is so important in my own life, is to just come off autopilot and make sure that I'm consciously choosing the things in life that matter to me.
Yeah. I mean,
because
that's
the world will choose for us pretty easily.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You say that you go on autopilot. I think a lot of people probably feel like they have that tendency because that's what a lot of us are doing. But if you look around, I mean, it's not solely on us. The world is kind of set up to distract at all points, everything. I mean, the advertising industry alone is primarily built upon that concept. So, yeah. I mean, I get it. I definitely get it.
Culturally, the deck is stacked
Yeah.
living an aware, conscious life, right? It really is.
Yeah.
It takes, we read a little thing before every show, that I wrote at the beginning of the show, and every once in a while I'm like, should I change it? But I still think a lot of it. And there's a line in there that says, it takes constant, consistent, and creative effort, to make a life worth living. And so that's the thing, is I think it does. And yet culturally, Lord, it's you can lose weeks.
I mean, tell me
no
about
time flat. Turn on a series. Not even bad TV, right?
No,
Turn on a good TV series like The Sopranos.
Yeah,
TV
yeah,
show, right?
amazing.
2 weeks gone, right?
I've been there. I've done it.
And it's designed to do that. I think that's the thing. People, I work with clients on coaching, and it'll be like, well, it's just really hard for me at the end of one episode not to watch the next.
Yes.
I'm like, of course it is.
It's literally made to do that.
Specifically for that reason. You are, that has been engineered to cause you to not get up and do something else. And so, you talked about space earlier, the ability to put a little space in there. If you can put a little space between this Netflix episode and the next one, just a little bit, you can often resist the next one.
It's like food. I've noticed that with food.
Yeah.
I have a tendency to really enjoy eating, and I will just go into autopilot and I've noticed this so many times. It actually, truthfully, hasn't prevented me from overeating that often, but I'll notice as I'm like, let's say I'm eating a chip. Before I even finish biting that chip, I'm thinking about the next chip that's going in, and that's the beginning. That's a teeny little bit of awareness, but when you can make that gap a little bit bigger, and meditation, obviously, it helps with this so much. But when you can make it a little bit bigger, you actually have choice there. You can actually make that decision rather than making the choice of non-choice. So, yeah.
That's right. And I do think, that's, one of my favorite books of all time is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's so much wisdom in that book, but he is, that was the first place that I, originally Viktor Frankl said it, there's a place between stimulus and response.
Yes.
And in that space lies all our human freedoms.
Yes.
And that's why I meditate. I am not one of those people that meditates and I think it is blissful or it makes me feel great, or for me, it is it's like going to the gym a lot.
Yeah.
I wish I hear people describe their meditation. I'm like, I wish that was what meditation was like for me, and maybe someday.
Yeah.
But what I think I get, which is a tangible thing, is that space between stimulus and response grows a little bit. This is not like, people talk about meditation and mindfulness like it's magic.
Like a panacea. It's not.
It's not by any way, shape, or form. What it does, I think, is gives me a chance to become more aware and then make what's often very difficult decisions to do something different. But at least I'm getting a chance.
Yeah. No,
that's what I get out of it.
That's spot on. I mean, that's what it's been for me. I also, outside of maybe one or two experiences I've had while meditating that I would describe as blissful, no, that's primarily been the domain of psychedelics for me. Meditation has been the other real. It's tough, and I also view it like going to the gym. One of the things that I'm working on coming in 2016 is I'm really trying to figure out a new twist. It's not a new idea, but a way to actually start people to meditate, however it needs to be for them. Because I work with spiritual clients, all of these people, every single day. I'm working on offerings, I'm working on all of this stuff, conversions, everything. And I still have trouble meditating on a regular basis. I do it, but I still have trouble with it. So I'm trying to figure out some inroads that can kind of make it, because like just like going to the gym. When I really start going to the gym, I'm into it. And I'm like, oh my God, how was I ever not going to the gym? I feel great. This is amazing. So getting up to that point where people view meditation or can experience the benefits on a lasting basis, but also framing it exactly like you're saying. Like if we frame mindfulness and meditation as a cure-all, it's doomed to fail. That's not how it works. It's not how anything works. If something worked like that, we'd all already been doing it at this point. So like
that's right. And I think I had a breakthrough in finally becoming a regular meditator when I finally stopped expecting anything. As long as I was expecting I should feel a certain way, I didn't think it worked for me. I kept saying I'm not the kind of person who'd meditate. So I'd meditate for a few months, nothing dramatic would happen, and I'd stop. And then I'd, of course, become convinced of the benefits of meditation again, and I'd do it, and I'd stop. And, you know, for me, I think meditation is like creating any other good habit, which is, I think, that's primarily the coaching work that I do with people, is primarily around basic behavior change. And there are some pretty fundamental principles that you can apply to these sort of things to build a good habit. I mean, you know, starting small, you know, building consistency, building some form of accountability into it. That's such a big one. You know, that's what I think, that is the one that I keep spinning in my head around, is how can we create programs for people virtually that create real accountability?
Yes.
Because the coaching work that I do with people, you know, 8 out of 10 people will make dramatic habit change almost immediately. And the honest truth is, all I'm really doing is I'm giving them somebody to be accountable to.
Yes. I mean,
I'm giving them a human being that they care about, or, you know, that they have some relationship with. Some relationship with a human being whom they don't want to disappoint, or they want to make feel proud of them, or they want to connect with. That's it. It works. I mean, not that I'm not providing some good tips and strategies, but I honestly think 9 times out of 10, that's it. I mean, I used to do this thing every New Year. I would gather a group of friends together, and we would do something called the Body Fat Challenge. And we would go get our body fat measured in one of those fancy body pods, and we would it would be not who can lose the most weight, who can lose the most percentage of body fat in 90 days. And what was amazing to me was that nearly everybody in that program lost dramatic amounts of weight, despite the entire year before. I mean, I usually asked people who I knew had been trying to exercise or eat better, had been failing.
Yeah.
And 90% of us did great. And why? What was different? The only thing that was different is that we had this thing amongst ourselves. Now, it was a competition, but it was a friendly competition, right?
Sure.
But it was a joking competition, but it brought that human element of accountability into it. Right. And suddenly people were able to do something that all year before they had been unable to do. And when the Body Fat Challenge ended, you know, 70% of the people went back to the way they were before. And so how you build that into a virtual community is what I keep thinking about, because we try with things like Coach.me or Headspace, where you check in and somebody virtually says, hey, congratulations on your check-in. But I don't know who Vlad, who just gave me props for checking in, is. I don't care.
Right. I know.
So how can you build that sort of accountability in? And so I'm working on some courses for next year, and that's a big piece of what I'm wrestling with, is how do you do that?
Well, I mean, my thoughts on it are, it goes back to the first thing that you mentioned here. One of the first things is the community aspect of it, because I think what everyone is looking for, and I think why accountability ultimately works, is people are looking for that human connection. And it's not just the human connection, like, oh, I'm connecting with someone, but they want to be loved and they want to love. Right. That's ultimately what people want. And having a coach and having someone help you is an expression of love. That's how I view my work with my clients. I view it as, I'm helping you. I'm not doing it to take your money. And that's what some people, and unfortunately, a lot of people approach business like that. And that's kind of how the system's set up. But when you approach it from that different place, I definitely want to talk to you some more about what you're going on with your courses, because I think we have some similar views on this. So I want to end on this. This has flew by the way, as all of the fun ones do. I want to end with, so you've mentioned many during this conversation, but what is one or maybe 2 practical tips you can give people for what has had a positive impact? What has fed your good wolf? What could you offer people as tips?
I'll give two. One is what I just talked about a minute ago, which was, behavior change. I think that being able to change in our lives almost always means change in our behavior to some degree, right? Even if that means exercising instead of watching another episode of Wheel of Fortune. Right? Whatever that is, or meditating, or eating better, or spending more time with our wife or our kids or our family. There's usually a behavior change to some degree. And so behavior change can be greatly simplified by starting really, really small. I work with clients on, all right, I want you to exercise for 5 minutes tomorrow. And your mind will go, that's stupid. I'm not going to get in shape exercising 5 minutes a day. And of course, no, you're not. But 5 minutes is still better than no minutes, which is what you've been doing. And there's lots of science to support. If I start at 5 minutes and I get a little bit of momentum, then I can go to 10, then I can go to 15. But the key is to do 5 minutes every day. Start to build that consistent habit. It works in a dramatic way. So start small. Start way smaller than you think. And if you can't do what you've said is small, go smaller. Leo Babuda writes a blog called Zen Habits, which is a great, very popular. And he said he's got a saying: make it so small you can't say no to it. Like, that's what I basically do. Is it's just like, how can I possibly not do this for 2 minutes? Like, that would be pathetic.
Yeah.
So start really small, and then I think the other thing is, when it comes to inspiration and motivation, I think we all tend to just consume. Like, I'll go out and read 8 blog posts about living a better life. I won't remember any of them. I'm finding it's a lot better to go back over things that I've read. We had a guest early on who said, if you just changed your ratio of, for every hour you spent consuming, you spent 30 minutes integrating into your life, whether that be taking notes on it, reading it back over, thinking about how it might impact your life would change completely. And that's been, that's certainly my experience, is instead of just consuming, slow down a little bit and take some of these things you are learning and figure out how to integrate them into your life, do something with them. And I think that, one of the things I would say that I've learned on the show very much is that I don't hear very much on the show that I'm like, oh my God, I never thought of that. I never heard that before, right? You spend a little bit of time around spiritual and personal development circles, you've heard most of it, right?
Yes.
It's the, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
It's the remembering,
That's right.
It's the, I know it today, but for some godforsaken reason, tomorrow I don't remember it. It's not in my brain. So put it back in your brain, and put it back in your brain the next day. And that's what helps me.
Yeah. Well, it's the concept of kind of resonance and then integration. And that is, I love it.
It's a much more elegant way to say what I say.
Man, this is great. I really had an awesome time. Thank you again for coming on.
She kneels before the grave, a brave son who gave his life to save a slogan that hovers between the headstone and her eyes, for they penetrate her grieving